You're up to date here on GB News. I'll have more on all of our top stories for you at 10 o'clock. But now to Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning, everybody. You're watching To The Point here on GB News with Mercy Muroki and, of course, me, Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of all of today's big stories, lots of discussion on the issues that you care about. So here's what's coming up. Yes, tensions are rising with France as French authorities detain a British trawler in a growing row about post-Brexit fishing rights. We'll discuss how the situation is likely to escalate with an expert very shortly. Yes, we will indeed. And the Duchess of Cornwall has voiced her concerns over violence against women and girls. During a speech, Camilla said, "We do not in any way hold all men responsible for sexual violence, but we do need all of them on board to tackle it." We'll talk about Camilla's call to action on the show very shortly. Yes, and we'll be bringing you all of the reaction to yesterday's budget by the Chancellor. What does it mean for your family? The more money in your pocket, and we'll actually take money off the price of a pint, apparently. That's what Rishi has promised. And we'll be talking to former Tory Cabinet Minister Michael Portillo just after 10 as well. We have all of that coming up and much more across the programme, and you can get in touch as usual on GBViews at gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on the escalating tensions with France. War with France. OK, maybe not war, but tensions are certainly hotting up. Now, it would be very easy for me to sit here and just wheel out a load of lazy French stereotypes, like the fact that their flag might as well not have red and blue in it, or that most of their navy is currently at the bottom of the Mediterranean, or that their tanks only have one gear and that gear is reversed. But I would never do such a thing, because I'm better than that. I'm a bigger man, and there's no need to stoop to that level. Anyway, these garlic-wearing, chateau-dwelling, cheese-eating surrender merchants are really trying it on. They've detained a British fishing boat for allegedly fishing illegally in French waters. Now, of course, if it was fishing illegally, then fair play, because those are the rules. But it comes amid a backdrop of escalating tensions between our two nations. France is threatening to cause massive trade disruption if we don't give more of their boats licences to fish in our waters. But the reason we're not doing this is because of the Brexit deal, which was agreed to by the EU. In fact, a Brexit deal drawn up and pontificated over by a chap called Michel Barnier, who is French. So it's their fault. Regardless, the French are also threatening to cut the power off to Jersey and blockade their port. May I politely suggest to President Macron that if he really wants to take action against the people responsible for his fishermen being so unhappy, then maybe he should blockade his own ports and turn his own power off. Look, it's not hard to figure out what's really happening here. Emmanuel Macron has an election coming up. And what better way to rabble-rouse than attempt to stick it to the English? I mean, Macron knows better than anyone that a little bit of threatening conflict works very well at an election. When French boats attempted to blockade Jersey, Boris Johnson sent in a couple of warships. That was on the eve of the local elections, and look what happened. The Tories made gains, or to put it another way, Labour basically went backwards everywhere apart from Wales. So, really, Emmanuel Macron allowed a situation to occur that helped make Boris Johnson a more powerful Prime Minister. I'm not sure he's a master strategist. Look, I think we need to face facts. The French are not our friends. They're like the kid at school who'd invite you to a party just so he can snog your missus in front of you. In recent months, France has stolen PPE destined for the UK. That PPE was obviously supposed to be used in care homes, the NHS, schools. The French apparently stole 5 million vaccines destined for Britain as well. Both of these actions will have cost British lives. France's behaviour is not normal. There clearly isn't a word for either diplomacy or decency in the French dictionary. Ultimately, Macron's actions would be self-defeating as well, because more French boats fish in UK waters than the other way round, and I'd really doubt that he wants to put us in a situation where we ban them from doing so. Look, if France really is an ally, then, well, with friends like those, who needs enemies? It's hotting up in the Channel, isn't it? Yes, indeed. They've been detained a British trawler, as you mentioned there. They're also threatening to cut off electricity from Jersey. But there's also, we'll be talking about this with somebody who very much knows what they're talking about very shortly. What are you trying to say? Hey, I'm not saying anything. But they've got a whole host of measures that they're threatening to impose actually from Tuesday of next week.
ultimatums they're giving us, basically, which include preventing British fishing boats from disembarking at ports, increasing border and sanitary checks on UK goods, tightening security checks on British boats, increasing checks. So, and they've also saying that they're willing and ready to sort of impose more sanctions if possible. So absolutely, an increase in tensions, and one that I'm sure no side is welcoming at the moment, particularly the people caught up in this war, so to speak, who are the fishermen.
Yeah, absolutely. It just seems a bit self-defeating. Like I said there, you know, at the end of the day, we're doing this because of the Brexit deal, and that Brexit deal doesn't particularly please a lot of British fishermen. It's not like, you know, Boris Johnson put a tie on, didn't he, outside Downing Street with a load of fish on it after the day he signed that deal. But actually, if you go and speak to British fishermen, not a lot of them are overly happy about the whole thing. But the French certainly aren't either. So, you know, it's the idea that we've, you know, in some way kind of like tried to monopolise our waters it's just wrong, you know, and it wasn't really our decision to do it.
Yes, well, we'll get some more expert opinion shortly, but let's move on to another story. Sadly, it's about Extinction Rebellion, and their protesters have broken into an oil refinery in Hampshire this time. The group have confirmed that 2 British Olympians, Laura Baldwin and Etienne Stott, are demonstrating with them. They're demanding that the UK government stops all fossil fuel investments.
Yes, well, the protesters are using pink boats to blockade the main entrance to the ExxonMobil Fawley refinery, which is actually quite a tongue twister when you say it like that. We will have more details as we get them throughout the show.
Yes, so Extinction Rebellion back at it again.
They are.
I mean, obviously people have a right to protest. I do think at the moment in the country there's not much appetite amongst ordinary people who are, particularly people on low incomes, who at the moment, probably more so than for a long time, they're having to think about the fact their taxes are going up, perhaps they're paying more for energy. You know, so many people, even when they are in work, are on universal credit. There's so much going on that is of actual tangible importance, bread and butter issues for so many people. And I just do think when people, ordinary people, who I do think generally do care about climate change, when they see whether it's Extinction Rebellion or Insulate Britain sort of taking up the news agenda with what doesn't seem like a pressing issue to most people, then it's a bit of a slap in the face. I think we should be sort of talking more and giving more space to bread and butter issues that affect ordinary people, not sort of what Insulate Britain are doing and what Extinction Rebellion are doing to cause disruption.
Well, Animal Rebellion were up a building the other day, weren't they? We spoke to a couple of them. Yeah, so look, it just seems to be happening more and more, doesn't it? In fact, it's every day now, really, whether it's Insulate Britain, Extinction Rebellion, Animal Rebellion, whatever it'll be.
I actually saw a video yesterday, some of you might have seen it, of a Scottish guy playing bagpipes. We'll try and get it up later. A Scottish guy playing the bagpipes in the face of one of the Insulate Britain protesters to annoy him, and then he was swiftly moved along by police. And I didn't know playing the bagpipes was a criminal offence in this country.
It should be.
Hey, what's wrong with the bagpipes?
Absolutely everything.
No, I don't agree with that.
Oh, come off it. Well, you don't have a deep passion for the bagpipes.
I think they sound amazing, actually.
No, you don't. No one does.
I do.
Right.
OK, well, give us your views about bagpipes and indeed anything else we've been talking about today, including that very serious issue of escalating tensions between France and Britain. And we'll just quickly go to the inbox before a short break.
Yes, we will. John's been in touch. This is about France. The sort of friend who would come to your party to eye up what you've got, and then get their mates to come along and steal it. Well, that's strong stuff, John, in Yorkshire. Yes, this is a lot of people saying if it wasn't for, well, the classic line, if it wasn't for Great Britain, then France may not be the country it is today. But, you know, we can't always bang on about...
And vice versa, as well.
Can't always bang on about the war. Anyway, yes, so lots of people basically saying, look, we need to stand up to France. But yes, this is Simon's view. Perhaps the war is a little bit extreme. And I think, hopefully, fingers crossed, we don't go to all-out war with the French.
Yes, indeed. Let's hope so. While GB Views at gbnews.uk, keep your views coming in. But coming up after the break, we'll be diving into the details of what we've just been talking about, this French fishing row. We'll be speaking with the defence editor of the London Evening Standard, so stay with us for that.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Good morning. Let's delve a bit deeper into the issue we've been speaking about already this morning. French authorities have detained a British trawler off its coast. France has also once again threatened to impose sanctions against the UK over fishing rights. And this so-called cod war started after post-Brexit Britain restricted access to British waters for EU fishermen. And just this week, France has threatened to impose a number of sanctions, including harsh customs control on British imports, a ban on British vessels from some French ports, and even cutting off electricity to the Channel Islands unless Britain allows French boats back in.
Well, we're now joined by Robert Fox, defence editor at the Evening Standard. Thank you very much, Robert. Great to have you on the show this morning. Is this a bit of an extreme reaction, in your view, by the French?
It's fairly characteristic, as you have said. There's a lot of caricature going on down here, isn't it? I think, Patrick, you're right in pointing out that Mr. Macron is in rather a desperate election campaign. He's at the beginning of it, but it seems that he's been electioneering to be re-elected as president ever since he was elected the first time round. And that is muddying the waters, pardon the expression. There's a lot of detail, there's a lot of frustration, and as you have rightly pointed out, there's a lot of frustration on both sides in the fishing community. The British fisher community, I was just listening before breakfast this morning, and they were putting it out that they feel that they have been underrepresented by DEFRA, their ministry, compared with what the French Ministry for Fisheries is prepared to do, always up the ante, whereas Boris Johnson and the DEFRA ministry particularly wants to sort of dial down the thing. I think by the way, we're just at the beginning of this. This will run through most of the winter now.
And there's also a big disparity I noticed this morning between what either side is saying in terms of the number of licences. I guess that's the crux of this issue. France says its fishermen have not been issued with half the licences, but the British government says it's granted 98% of licence applications from EU vessels. So why is this massive discrepancy taking place?
Well, this will go on because it's as you said, it's a matter of interpretation of what was agreed from the Brexit deal when it was finally done. It was understood, as we're seeing with Northern Ireland, a lot of the detail will still have to be worked out. It will have to be tested as it goes along. The great thing that Boris Johnson is doing, which I think is interesting, it's honourable, and it's clever, is not to talk gunboat diplomacy at the moment. But it's one of the things long term that we are going to have to look at is fishery protection. It's very, very important. But I want to throw another spanner in the work because I don't think some of France's EU allies can be very happy at what they're doing. The Spanish like fishing in British waters a lot and don't want that messed around with. And they don't want this constant confrontation the rhetoric of confrontation from Macron and big trading partners, and they're still big trading partners like the Dutch and the Germans, really don't like the Napoleon Macron stance.
No, I absolutely not. And I can understand that completely. Practically speaking, then, if Emmanuel Macron does do all of the things that he's threatened to do, what can we do in return? What should we do in return? Because I think a lot of people watching this might be thinking, well, we don't want to just sit back and let them get away with it all, as it were.
Yes, well, it's really, we're in Monty Python territory, aren't we here? If he does what you've just said, and he may well do it, he will be a very, very silly boy indeed, I think, because it will lead nowhere. It'll split his own alliance, it will upset the EU, as I have pointed out. And if he imposes sanctions, well, Boris Johnson and his government are bound to reply with similar sanctions, which they will ratchet up slowly. What I think the British will have to do, and I think they are doing it, is to point out that France has got as much to lose as anybody in this. But again, we've got this breakneck approach to electioneering. The problem for Macron is that he fears all the time he's going to be outflanked by the nationalist right. Not only Marine Le Pen, we now have Mr. Barnier. Remember, you mentioned him. Possibly running for the old Gaullist party. There are people even further to the right. But just to look at French politics, I think that people are much more worried about Macron's stance on fuel taxes, the kind of protests we saw with the Gilets jaunes, and actually I think they don't care too much for this ranting against the Brits. The Brits don't matter to most French people.
Yes, well, Robert Fox, thanks so much for your analysis this morning, defence editor at the Evening Standard. And I think one other thing the French people might care about is the harsh restrictions that are being imposed on them in terms of COVID passports and things like that. So lots of actual social, not to diminish the importance of this at all, but lots of social issues, important social issues going on in France at the moment, in mainland France.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting what you said there about Michel Barnier as well. It's just an interesting dynamic, isn't it, what's taking place in France at the minute. Part of me does wonder whether or not Michel Barnier, Mr. EU, wasn't he, for quite a while? He's running on a relatively centre-right ticket over there, whether or not he's doing it just to split the right and ensure that we don't end up with some kind of nationalist party in France. But, hey, we may never know.
Yes, well, let's take you to something else that's been going on. The Duchess of Cornwall has made a speech strongly condemning sexual and domestic violence against women and girls in the wake of Sarah Everard and Sabina Ness's murders. Since becoming a member of the royal family, Camilla has made domestic abuse and the protection of women a cornerstone of her public work. The Duchess was speaking at the launch of Shameless Festival, a new annual one-day event bringing together activism and art to confront and change attitudes towards sexual violence. So let's see what she had to say.
This country has been appalled and saddened by the loss of women to violence this year. On average, one woman is killed by a man every 3 days. Sarah Everard, Sabina Nessa, Wenjing Lin, Jatiko Goyle and Benelin Burke are names which, with all the others, must never be forgotten. We need to get the men in our lives involved in this movement. We do not in any way hold all men responsible for sexual violence, but we do need them all aboard to tackle it. After all, rapists are not born, they're constructed.
I think that was really important there, she said. I think sometimes people get the wording wrong, and in a difficult issue like this where it can often feel like you're pitting men against women, and I think it was important what she said there. It's not about saying that all men, you know, we should be looking at all men as rapists or whatever it is. But we do need all men to sort of be on board, so to speak, because it is very much as reliant on men as anybody else to also tackle this issue. I feel like sometimes men feel a bit excluded from when women are talking about violence against women and girls, whatever. They don't feel almost a right to have an opinion in that debate. No,
I think so as well, and also as well, it can shut debate down, or not that there's too much of a debate here to be had, really, is there? But I think if you end up in a situation where every single man feels as though they're, being blamed for something, then actually sometimes you might stop listening, and we do need more men to listen about this issue, don't we?
Yes, indeed, Bob. Just going to go to your views very quickly before taking another short break.
Yes, OK. Lots of reaction to your love of bagpipes.
Yes, I mean, it's not
your deep-seated passion of bagpipes, yes.
But I think it's a beautiful sound, I do.
Yes, I love the bagpipes.
You have bagpipes.
I love the. I think it sounds like a drowning cat. I love the bagpipes. When I hear bagpipes, I get goosebumps. It's a very British sound. That's from Gary.
Yeah, I think so.
Lots of people getting in touch to tell me that that I'm wrong about bagpipes.
You are.
I don't think I am. But anyway, yes. Look, lots of people as well, of course, getting in touch about the issue with France potentially escalating tensions. I suppose the cod war in the Channel at the moment, as the French essentially are saying that they might end up doing things like blockade ports and disrupt trade with us, etc., unless we allow them more boats in our waters. And people saying basically they think all the fish in the Channel are theirs. That's from Keith. So yes, a lot of you take quite a strong stance on the French, it's fair to say.
Yes, well, keep your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk, and we'll be getting to those throughout the show. But after this short break, we'll be back with more of today's top stories and plenty of your views as well. So let's give you the weather.
Hello, very good morning to you. Further wet weather is expected today across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, as well as increasingly Wales and then the southwest. It will be another mild day with these humid southwesterlies, but these southwesterlies contain a lot of moisture, and it's over western parts of the UK where that moisture is currently being dumped, particularly over the higher ground. That's why we've seen so much rainfall during the last 24 hours across southern Scotland and Cumbria, and that rainfall continues for a time during the rest of today, with an amber warning in force for that risk of flooding. Wales increasingly seeing the rain turn up here, and across Wales it turns wet by the afternoon. Cornwall as well, and then by the end of the day, western parts of Devon. Either side of that, we've got some rain or showers across the rest of Scotland, but brighter skies in the far northwest as well as Northern Ireland. Staying dry across the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. Cloudy here, but very mild once again. Here's the rain band, though. It pivots and it starts to move its way into the Midlands. It continues across northern England, Wales and the southwest on Thursday night. And western Scotland also seeing another feature bring some heavy rain in by dawn. But Northern Ireland sees clear skies, and East Anglia and the southeast also sees clear spells. Mild once again overnight. But a wet start for many, particularly for Scotland, much of northern and central England, Wales and the southwest tomorrow morning. The rain is finally making progress eastwards, though. So by the afternoon, some showers turn up in East Anglia and the southeast, and the rain or showers ease elsewhere. Brighter skies into the west, and feeling a bit fresher. We'll have lost that very mild airflow. However, the weather this weekend stays highly changeable. Further rain or showers, often windy with that as well. And there's a cooling trend. Temperatures will head back down towards average for the time of year.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
I
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Good morning, everybody. You are watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Moroki, and we're all the way through until midday today with a show stacked full of all of those big topics and big guests as well. But right now, it's time for your latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 10 o'clock. Britain faces its highest tax burden since the 1950s. Well, that's the Resolution Foundation's analysis of the impact of the Chancellor's autumn budget. Well, it found that households will pay £3,000 more tax as a result of measures introduced since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, including yesterday's budget. Well, the Chancellor says his ambition is to lower taxes. He announced an extra £150 billion for public services, tax cuts for businesses, extra cash for hospitals, a softening of the cut to universal credit and a freeze for fuel duty. The Office for Budget Responsibility said the plans will take public spending to the highest share of the economy since the late 1970s. Well, Shadow Treasury Secretary James Murray told GB News the Chancellor's priorities are completely out of touch.
You've got people who are working but struggling and not receiving universal credit. There's basically nothing in the budget for them apart from a tax hike. And for everyone who's facing the costs of energy going up, there was nothing to reduce VAT on domestic energy bills as we've called for ahead of the budget. So overall, if you look at the government's decisions, they managed to find time for a tax cut for bankers. But what we didn't see was a plan that puts working people first and invests in the growth and jobs of the future.
The French government says it's detained a British trawler and given a verbal warning to another boat fishing in waters off its coast. Tweeting this morning, the French maritime minister said that 2 British ships were fined during the checks off the coast of Le Havre on Wednesday. It's the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. Extinction Rebellion protesters have broken into an oil refinery in Hampshire, demanding that the UK government stops all fossil fuel investments. 2 British Olympians, Laura Baldwin and Etienne Scott, are demonstrating with them. The protesters are using pink boats to blockade the main entrance to the ExxonMobil Fawley refinery. ExxonMobil told GB News, "Our focus includes reducing our emissions. We respect the right to peaceful protest, but our priority is the safety of our people." ExxonMobil Fawley continues to operate safely and is not experiencing any impact on production. 4 people have been charged after animal rebellion protesters scaled a government building in Westminster yesterday. They were charged for aggravated trespass. All 4 were bailed to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on November the 15th. Police say 500 rounds of ammunition were found at the film set of Alec Baldwin's movie Rust. It follows the fatal shooting of cinematographer Haylyn Hutchins. Detectives also confirmed that criminal charges were possible. The Santa Fe County Sheriff Adam Mendoza says investigations have revealed vital evidence.
The actual lead projectile that was fired has been recovered from the shoulder of Mr. Souza. The projectile was recovered by medical personnel where he was being treated and turned over to the Sheriff's Office as evidence. We regard this specific spent casing and recovered projectile to be the live round that was fired from the revolver by Mr. Baldwin.
The Duchess of Cornwall has called for action to prevent violence against women. Speaking at Shameless Festival in London, the Duchess paid tribute to Sarah Everard and her family. Well, she urged for the names of women whose lives have been brutally ended by male violence to never be forgotten. Camilla also encouraged more men to get on board with tackling the issue to help create a violence-free world.
This country has been appalled and saddened by the loss of women to violence this year. On average, 1 woman is killed by a man every 3 days. Sarah Everard, Sabina Nessa, Wenjing Lin, Jatika Goyle and Benelin Burke are names which, with all the others, must never be forgotten.
A Royal Marines cadet hopes to inspire young Muslims to join the British military by celebrating Muslim heroes. 16-year-old Salahuddin Hussein is completing the gruelling Special Forces selection march known as the Fan Dance. He's been inspired by Muslim winners of the Victoria Cross Medal and has been sharing their stories.
A lot of young Muslim and Asian people in this country often feel kind of a disconnect from things like the military, but I know if the education was provided to everyone and everyone knew how involved their ancestors and people like them were, they'd want to join up and they wouldn't feel as though they couldn't.
You're up to date here on GB News. I'll have the latest headlines for you at 10:30. But now back to the point with Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of all today's big stories and lots of discussion as well on the issues you care about. So here's what's coming up.
Yeah, it's going to be a massive hour, this one. We'll be bringing you the latest on the government's budget. The Chancellor has said the Conservatives are now the real party of public services, with government spending set to hit its highest level since the 1970s, and vows to go on a mission to cut taxes. We'll talk about all of that with you, and of course we're going to be joined as well by former Tory Cabinet Minister Michael Portillo in just about 5 minutes' time.
Yes, and where are we in terms of COVID at the moment? How many cases, deaths and jabs? We'll be bringing you a roundup of all the key facts and figures, and we'll ask if this winter will see us locked down again.
Yes, and how will the new budget affect our beer, booze and pubs? We'll be speaking to business owners who want to make their voices heard. We're also going to be talking, of course, to the owner of a brewery to go right to the very top when it comes to those issues. We have all of that coming up and much, much more across the programme. And you can get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Mercy gives her views on America's new gender-neutral passports.
The US State Department confirmed yesterday that it has issued the first ever American gender-neutral passport. Rather than a male or female designation, the new gender-neutral passport simply has the letter X in the gender box. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that these new X passports will be offered as an option on passports, following in the footsteps of other countries such as Canada, Australia and Germany, who already offer third options for sex on passports. The first recipient of this passport is one Dana Zim, a 63-year-old biological man who says he is neither male or female. Zim says that the goal is to help the next generation of intersex people win recognition as full citizens with rights. What rights exactly he was being denied by having male on his passport is unclear to me, I'll be honest. But all of this unsettles me because where America goes, Britain can be found not too far behind. And I don't want the introduction of gender-neutral passports in this country. Why? Well, firstly, because biological sex is a fundamental and meaningful reality. I'm not talking about gender, which I accept is an ambiguous concept. I'm talking about biological sex. There is a branch of pseudoscience that tries to peddle the myth that biological sex is a spectrum, and I reject this. They say sex is a spectrum because some male and female characteristics overlap and because some people are legitimately intersex. That is, they have a medical condition where their reproductive and sexual anatomy is genuinely mixed. And yes, intersex people do exist. But the condition is incredibly rare. Around 0.018% of people are estimated to be biologically intersex. And these people have a legitimate case to make for gender-neutral passports, but not just anyone who declares themselves sexless. Just because intersex people exist, it does not mean sex is a spectrum. Evolutionary biologist Colin Wright, whose explanations of sex I would highly recommend, makes this analogy. Say you have an American nickel, a 5-cent coin. It has two faces, obviously, but it, of course, also has an edge. And there's about a 1 in 6,000 chance that if you flip the nickel, it will land on its edge. But heads and tails remain different and mutually exclusive outcomes. It does not make coin faces a spectrum. And likewise, sex in humans is almost always unambiguously and exclusively male or female. That's a biological fact. Some people might ask, why do I care so much? What harm does it do to let someone change their gender to an X on a passport? But it does matter to society as a whole. If fundamental biological reality can be so easily dismissed and contorted on the whims of anyone who demands it, this is dangerous. What does this mean for how science and medicine views distinctly male and female issues? For how we prioritise and allocate public services and support? For how we record and understand criminal behaviour? Indeed, how we understand any form of behaviour that is linked to biological sex? For how we safeguard women and girls for athletic competition? And in fact, for knowledge and for truth itself. An X on a passport might seem like a small price to pay for some, but I don't want to sleepwalk onto the slippery slope of sex spectrum pseudoscience.
Yeah, interesting, because I think a lot of people will just say, well, why bother getting so worked up about it? It's just an X on a passport.
And that's a legitimate question, I think, to ask. And I think we can actually show you the passport, what the passport looks like now. So that's the gentleman there.
Well, is it?
Well, I mean, exactly. Maybe I don't know what to use. I don't know what the right word is. Gentleman, woman, who knows? But that's what the passport looks like. Has an X on it. You can see on the gender bit, and that's Dana Zim there on the screen, so the first recipient of this gender-neutral passport. And you know, you mentioned, well, people will say, well, why do you care so much? You must be transphobic if you don't, or you know, something phobic if you don't want people to have an X on their passport. But actually, it's always the first step, these things, onto a much more dangerous slippery slope. And I don't think there's a more dangerous slippery slope than actually denying biological fact, which is what it is. And I understand gender and sex are two different things, and I accept that the conversation around gender is a more ambiguous concept. But for me, sex isn't the idea that sex is a spectrum is completely misleading, and it doesn't stand up to you know, scrutiny, scientific scrutiny, which is why I mentioned those statistics there. And yes, there are intersex people, 0.02%. I mentioned there, but this is about allowing anybody who declares themselves as sexless to change their passport, and I think we need to be careful about going down that kind of road.
OK, well, get in touch with us, gbviews at gbnews.uk. But we're going to move away from that just for now. And Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced the government's budget yesterday, pledging a major increase in public spending amid higher than expected economic growth. Well, to pave the way for his economy of higher wages, higher skills and rising productivity, he promised to invest more in schools, hospitals, skill workshops and devolved governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Now, in committing the government to its highest levels of public spending in history, he promised to use taxpayers' money wisely. That's nice of him. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
Whilst today's budget delivers historically high levels of public spending, its success will be measured not by the billions we spend, but by the outcomes we achieve and the difference we make to people's lives. The budgets are set, the plans are in place, the task is clear. Now we must deliver, because this isn't the government's money, it's taxpayers' money.
Yes, however, some from the left say this budget has left some of our most vulnerable behind, as Labour MP James Murray explained this morning.
We've got people who are working but struggling and not receiving universal credit. There's basically nothing in the budget for them apart from a tax hike. And for everyone who's facing the costs of energy going up, there was nothing to reduce VAT on domestic energy bills, as we've called for ahead of the budget. So overall, if you look at the government's decisions, they managed to find time for a tax cut for bankers. But what we didn't see was a plan that puts working people first and invests in the growth and jobs of the future.
Well, joining us now is former Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Michael Portillo. Thank you very, very much for coming into the studio. Great to have you on board. What do you make of the budget yesterday? Your overall takeaway from it all?
First of all, that it's much more than a budget. It is the declaration of an economic policy. And secondly, that economic policy is one that the Conservatives have never believed in, never espoused, don't believe in now, and have always thought would lead to disaster. So I think it leads to a substantial identity crisis inside the Conservative Party.
Why are they doing it then?
I think they're doing it because from the Prime Minister down, there's an idea that you never need to meet the bills, that you do today whatever seems the popular thing to do, and you keep rolling the can down the street and you hope that it just keeps rolling, or maybe that you're not there when it stops rolling. But, you know, if that is an attitude, and I think it is an attitude, it is now crystallised as a policy, and the policy is high taxation and high spending. And it's not only that Conservatives, you know, have never stood for that before and that there has been a philosophical change. I don't think there has. I mean, this is the problem. I don't think Conservatives believe in that any more now than they ever did before. And to illustrate a tiny bit of what I might be on about, we heard the Chancellor there saying, you know, it was a matter of how much you spent. It was, as it were, what you produced for people. But without irony, was it, I think, just the day before, we had the report on track and trace from the National Health Service, a House of Commons committee report, which talked about eye-watering waste. 37 or was it 39 billion pounds spent on this. At one time, at the height of the pandemic, just over 1 in 10 workers were actually working, even though they were paid £1,100 a day on average. So you can spend money in the public sector, but it may be wasted. And notice that none of this extra spending is accompanied by any agenda of reform. None of it is conditional. So the same people who have been mismanaging money are now to be rewarded with vast dollops of extra money. And also, it's now very apparent that whereas we thought we went through a period of austerity under Cameron and Osborne, what we actually went through was a period in which the budget of the National Health Service was growing out of control, and every other budget was being squeezed as a result of that. So that we now find out, I guess it was there for anyone who wanted to study it, the National Health Service budget has gone up by 40% since 2010, and spending per pupil has not gone up at all since 2010. That is an example of what's really happened. It wasn't austerity, it was the National Health Service growing like topsy. No one has controlled it, and no one is now proposing to do anything different as it's given the extra money.
Yes, and some people might say you might be being a bit unfair because we have had an unprecedented year and a half, for example, and the Chancellor's budget will be a reflection of the difficult decisions he says he had to make. I believe he said he was willing to do whatever it takes to make sure Britain got through the pandemic. So do you believe that actually when we are at the other end of this, then perhaps we will return to what many Conservatives would like to see, which is actually a low-tax government?
The newspapers today are full of very interesting analysis of the budget, and I think, in summary, we can say that the Chancellor did not just react to the pandemic, that in a way he's used the pandemic as cover for some very important discretionary decisions that he's made to increase public spending in various places. So it isn't that these decisions were inevitable. He may think that the pandemic provides a good opportunity to make this sort of shift, but they are not altogether a result of the pandemic. There are very important decisions he has made to increase public spending. I mean, just to give you one small example, he has made the decision to restore the expenditure on overseas aid. Had he not done that, that money, from memory, I think it's about 4.7 billion, but I may have got that wrong, would have been available for the National Health Service. So that, you know, there's money that he wouldn't have had to raise on the national insurance increase.
Just talk to me a bit more about your views on the health service and the amount of money that it gobbles up. You know, I think now a lot of people, I went out and about and pounded the pavements in Leicester Square and spoke to the great British public, and I asked them what they wanted from this budget. And look, the vast majority of them do want additional expenditure on the NHS. That said, though, the flip side to it was they said, well, if we do that, then we'd quite like it to be made that GPs have to go and get back into their surgeries, more face-to-face appointments, etc., etc., etc. Do you think there needs to be a bit of stick when it comes to the NHS and not just some carrot?
Good Lord, yes, absolutely. I mean, the failures of management and of cost control are evident, and, you know, they have been described by parliamentary committees. And remember, these parliamentary committees are cross-party. So, you know, Labour members of Parliament are signing up to criticising the appalling waste of money, particularly in track and trace. So, of course, things ought to be done differently. And although I wasn't there with you in Leicester Square, What I suspect the people said was not they want more spent on the NHS, but they want more NHS.
Yeah.
And that is something slightly different, because it may be that we spend much more on the NHS and get less NHS.
Yes.
If we take on more managers, or if we allow inflation in wages and pay, not least amongst managers, to absorb the money, we may spend more and get less.
And let's talk about families a little bit, because of course that is what makes up sort of Britain. And Paul Johnson at the IFS has just said that middle income families are set to be worse off next year amid rising costs and taxes. But on the other hand, working class families might feel like they've won out of this budget, particularly those on the lowest wages. We know there's a minimum wage increase, but also the universal credit taper reduction, which means they'll be able to sort of to keep more money in their pocket if they are on universal credit. Who do you think won in terms of families out of this budget?
Well, first let me say that I think the universal credit change is perhaps a unique example of a Conservative policy inside this budget. Ian Duncan Smith is writing in today's newspapers saying this is what I intended when I set up universal credit back in 2010, that we should encourage people to move from an out-of-work benefit into an in-work benefit, and that is by maintaining the same benefit and making sure that you don't lose too much of your benefit as your pay in work begins to rise. So that is a great policy, and apparently about 2 million people will benefit, and some of them may benefit by £1,000 a year, so that is significant. The minimum wage is a slightly different thing, because, of course, it is the government getting the private sector to do its dirty work in the first instance. In other words, if the government wants to sound like it's being generous, it says to employers, you pay people more. OK, so those people have to absorb the cost somehow. Of course, it also means that those costs will be experienced in the public sector too. And so, some of the tax rises, some of the extra public spending will actually go on paying people who will receive more money now because of the minimum wage.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of hidden elements to this, aren't there, really? And that's one thing I think that we get a lot of reaction to. It's all very well and good rising the minimum wage. Well, someone has to pay for that then, don't they? And obviously, like you said there, then that gets reflected back to it. Look, do you think that the Conservatives need to actually get back to more of their Conservative values when it comes to things like the budget, for example? I mean, they're getting away with it, aren't they? There's no real opposition.
Yeah, I think this could only have happened in the vacuum of no opposition. I think that is how it has occurred. And I can see that they can think it's very clever to steal the opposition's clothes. And I think they have created a problem for the Labour Party. The Labour Party doesn't know where to go. But stealing the opposition's clothes is only clever up to a point. If you've stolen a whole lot of policies that you don't believe in yourself, if you've taken away the reason for people to vote for you at all, and this is the most important thing of all, if you think that these policies are not the sort of policies that can possibly succeed, and you turn out to be right and they don't succeed, then you will have a real problem winning the election. Although I guess that the betting is that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party cannot win the next election. I think that probably is true. Yeah. So even if these policies do lead us to low growth and low productivity, and indeed the point you referred to a moment ago, people's standard of living falling back, even so, the Conservatives may well win.
Yes. And let's finish on a lighter note. We know railways is something you're quite passionate about. The Chancellor announced £46 billion for railways, £5.7 billion of that will be provided for London-style transport.
Another series for you sorted, isn't it?
London-style transport settlements in some of the other cities. You must welcome that.
Yeah, I was worried that HS2 might get cut. And I mean, just to say, every developed country seems to think it needs high-speed rail. So that's my single argument on high-speed rail. I don't see how every other country can believe they need it, and we could believe that we didn't need it. Again, the question of efficiency comes up. Crossrail is called the Elizabeth Line now. It was meant to open in 2018. Nobody knows when it will open. So again, spending money is one thing. Getting output, getting results, that's another.
Well, if we had the bullet train, your shows would only be about 5 minutes long, wouldn't they?
And you'd welcome that.
No, not at all. I must say I'm disappointed you haven't got your salmon-coloured trousers on. I was gutted about that.
Come on, I have turned up in a tartan suit. How many of your guests do that?
Talking of tartan, we've been having a debate this morning about
whether... You've started now, Michael.
A gentleman decided to protest against Insulate Britain blocking the roads by playing bagpipes in their face, which I thought was a rather clever way to...
Nice touch.
Absolutely.
And Patrick seems to hate the sound of bagpipes. I personally love it. What's your verdict?
I like the sound of bagpipes, but they are very, very loud, and if played right next to your ear, they would certainly encourage me to unglue myself and move on.
Yes, I'd be glad to rip my own hand off, I think. Look, thank you so much. Thank you for making the time for us, coming into the studio and wearing a resplendent tartan suit as well. Michael Portillo there, reacting to the budget and then a bit about bagpipes as well. Who'd have thought it? Hey, well, after the break, as we look ahead to the winter months, many are fearing another national lockdown or the reintroduction of restrictions. We'll be talking about where we are with COVID cases, deaths and vaccinations with a top epidemiologist in just a moment. But first, it's the weather.
Hello, very good morning to you. Further wet weather is expected today across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, as well as increasingly Wales and then the southwest. It will be another mild day with these humid southwesterlies, but these southwesterlies contain a lot of moisture, and it's over western parts of the UK where that moisture is currently being dumped, particularly over the higher ground. That's why we've seen so much rainfall during the last 24 hours across southern Scotland and Cumbria, and that rainfall continues for a time during the rest of today, with an amber warning in force for that risk of flooding. Wales increasingly seeing the rain turn up here, and across Wales it turns wet by the afternoon. Cornwall as well, and then by the end of the day, western parts of Devon. Either side of that, we've got some rain or showers across the rest of Scotland, but brighter skies in the far northwest as well as Northern Ireland. Staying dry across the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast. Cloudy here, but very mild once again. Here's the rain band, though. It pivots and it starts to move its way into the Midlands. It continues across northern England, Wales and the southwest on Thursday night. And western Scotland also seeing another feature bring some heavy rain in by dawn. But Northern Ireland sees clear skies, and East Anglia and the southeast also sees clear spells. Mild once again overnight. But a wet start for many, particularly for Scotland, much of northern and central England, Wales and the southwest tomorrow morning. The rain is finally making progress eastwards, though. So by the afternoon, some showers turn up in East Anglia and the southeast, and the rain or showers ease elsewhere. Brighter skies into the west, and feeling a bit fresher. We'll have lost that very mild airflow. However, the weather this weekend stays highly changeable. Further rain or showers, often windy with that as well. And there's a cooling trend. Temperatures will head back down towards average for the time of year.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GBNews.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GBNews.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, 4 to the point.
Good morning. Now, for the first time in weeks, COVID cases are down, with the UK reporting 6,000 less cases this week than last week, for a total of 37,500 people testing positive for COVID yesterday. However, there have been 1,010 deaths in the last 7 days, up by 56 on the previous 7 days. With over 85% of individuals over the age of 12 having now received at least one vaccination, are we still looking into a winter COVID crisis? Well, we can find out.
Yes, well, joining us now is Dr. Bharat Pankania, Senior Clinical Lecturer at the University of Exeter's Medical School, with over 20 years' experience in communicable disease control and infectious disease management. Thank you very much, Bharat, for joining us. Hey, maybe it won't be a winter of discontent after all. The cases are down. We've beaten COVID.
You know that's not true. I know you like to tease me. Look, there is a lot of, we shouldn't look at daily cases only. What we need to do is look at the trends. And at the moment, compared to, for example, our European counterparts, our trends are up. But let me just emphasize a very, very important point for our viewers and listeners. And the very, very important point is we've got influenza circulating in Europe now, and we must do all we can to suppress influenza infections in the United Kingdom. I see an Achilles heel here. It may already be a bit too late, because H3N2 version of influenza is in circulation, and if we don't get school kids and others fully immunized, we will have a big problem.
And when you say we'll have a big problem, is that in relation to the NHS's ability to cope, or are you also speaking in relation to how ill people are actually going to be this winter?
Thank you. It's both. So with H3N2 version of influenza, you in elderly people, you don't make good immunity even if you have been immunized. So immunized doesn't mean protected necessarily with the H3N2 version in circulation. And one way to suppress the presence of the virus is to immunize other people as well, i.e. schools. And the schools immunization program has not picked up pace. So the concerns are hospitals are already busy with other things. Then the hospitals are busy with COVID issues. And then the hospitals will get busy with influenza issues. And that could tip the balance. So we've really got to get cracking with immunizing and suppressing influenza. It may already be too late because it's on our doorstep.
And who should be considering getting immunised against influenza? Because I have to be honest, I have a 6-year-old child. I'm 26 myself. Should people like me, healthy people, younger people, be considering it for the first time ever, perhaps? Or should it just be those more vulnerable groups?
No, I'm really glad you asked. Prevention is brilliant. Prevention protects you from illness, and it is a safe vaccine. And if you so wish, you're young and you're healthy and you're able, that doesn't matter. The virus can still make you ill. So it is people who are eligible, please take up the offer of having it free. People who are not eligible, like yourself, please pay the £8 to £10 and protect yourself. It is a cheap way to really keep yourself healthy and safe.
Looking ahead now, it does appear that COVID obviously is here to stay, and it is something we're going to have to live with, one would imagine, potentially forever. The flu, that happens every single winter. If we have potential restrictions now, if we end up with a situation where we do have more restrictions going into Christmas, do you think in your mind that we're going to have those every single Christmas?
No, not at all, because we don't know how the virus will perform. But my summation would be like with all viruses, eventually they attenuate, meaning they lose their ability to cause severe illness, and we've got a heavily immunized population. So no, I do not expect that this is for years and years and years. In the next couple of years, I don't know. Nobody knows, but it will definitely not be forever.
OK, Bharat, thank you very much, Dr. Bharat Pankania there, just reacting to the latest COVID figures. Thank you very much for your time. Great to have you on the show.
Yes, indeed. Well, we're going to go to a few of your views as well.
Yes.
Just before we get to a break.
Absolutely, yes. Sorry, I've just been informed that we're going to go to the House of Commons now, actually. Apparently the Environment Secretary, George Eustace, is currently taking questions on the French fishing route. So let's go over there now.
Seafood goods arriving from the UK via HGV. And what advice would he offer to seafood exporters who will be concerned about more stringent and additional...
He repeatedly said he wanted to see, after the financial crisis, a mix of 80% spending cuts, 20% tax rises. And broadly speaking, that's what he delivered. And roughly speaking, it's also very different.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And of course, it's important to note that although the Honourable Lady refers to this being a trade dispute over trading arrangements, what's actually happening here is the French are threatening to take a particular approach to trade, but linked to, as they see it, issues that they have over the issuing of fishing licences. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid we completely reject that caricature. The Honourable Lady says that France has claimed it's been too slow. That's not true. Indeed, the vast majority of those 1,700 or so vessels that we have already licensed received their licence on the 31st of December. The only vessels that didn't have a licence immediately were those who struggled to marshal the data to support their application. But as soon as data has been provided, those vessels have been granted their access. And as I said earlier, many of those vessels are indeed French vessels. The Honourable Lady also mentioned the issue of the two vessels that have been initially detained. We understand one of them may still be detained. She raised the issue about whether a licence had been issued. What I've been able to establish so far is that in respect of that vessel, they were on the list that was provided by the MMO initially to the European Union. The European Union therefore did grant a licence. We are seeing some reports that for some reason they were subsequently withdrawn from the list. It's unclear why that might have been at the moment. She asked why I've not been able to establish this morning in the course of events why that's not been the case. I can say that the relevant data for this is held by Marine Scotland. And I have been asking my officials to get to the bottom of this issue. We have been told that Marine Scotland hope to get back to us within the next hour or so. But look, my officials will work very, very constructively with the Scottish Government, with their agencies such as Marine Scotland, to understand what happened in the case of this particular vessel.
David Ducat.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the escalation and the more, I think the words they use is more forceful language coming from not the French fishing industry, which we're kind of used to by now, but actually the French government. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the licensing process that's currently under dispute is entirely in line with not just the UK Fisheries Act, but also the Trade Cooperation Agreement itself, which was signed by all sides? And can he also commit that this government will not grant any further concession beyond that which is already granted to the French and other EU countries through the Trade and Cooperation Agreement?
Secretary of State.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, can I congratulate my honourable friend on his new role as our fisheries envoy in the government. I can think of nobody better to be a champion for the interests of fishing. And he raises a very important point, that being that everything we've done is entirely consistent with what was agreed in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And the point here, the reason that some vessels inevitably will not receive the licence that they might have had previously, is that both the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is different to both the Granville Bay Agreement that we had in respect of Jersey and, of course, the previous provisions of the Common Fisheries Policy, in that access is now determined by a reference period. And there will be some vessels that might have had the right to access, but nevertheless never used that access during the reference period, and will therefore, under the terms of the agreement that everybody understood, all sides understood, will no longer be entitled to access.
Luke Pollard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The threats and actions from France are completely wrong and unacceptable. There is a real need to ensure that everyone involved with this uses language to de-escalate the situation, to not risk the lives of either British or French fishers in any clashes at sea, and to ensure that there is uninterrupted trade between the United Kingdom and France. It's really important to set that out, but it seems to me that this situation is a result of the government losing control of some of the negotiations and positions that keeps our fishers safe for some time along the way. Can the Secretary of State set out, are the crew okay, and what support is being given to them? Can he also set out clearly that we expect our British fishing boats to be able to fish legally and sustainably and uninterrupted in French waters, as French boats can expect to fish legally, uninterrupted and sustainably in British waters, as per the agreement that has been set out? There is a real concern that the botched Brexit deal is going to lead to more clashes between UK and European fishers. Can he set out what steps he's taken to ensure that there is no further clashes and no risk of escalation? And can he also set out what steps he's taken to support our industry to make sure that this important trading period, where UK seafood exports provide a huge part of the annual income for fishing businesses, are not uninterrupted, because there's a risk that it erodes confidence in European suppliers from buying from British companies? Can I further ask the Secretary of State if he will, once having investigated whether the licence for this boat, if having been granted by UK authorities and subsequently removed from an MMO or Marine Scotland register, whether he will come back to the House to report on what has happened, what lessons can be learned, and to ensure that this doesn't happen again? But can I ask him sincerely to use his offices within government to ensure that there are no voices that seek to escalate and churn up distrust between ourselves and our colleagues in Europe, because in the risk of escalation is the risk of lives being put at risk at sea, and we must ensure that everyone that goes to sea to catch fish is safe. Thank you.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I just welcome the tone with which the Honourable Gentleman has approached this. He's absolutely right that it is important that we remain calm on this, that we try to de-escalate it. The UK government and the authorities in Jersey and Guernsey have implemented the provisions of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. We've licensed many vessels. In the case, for instance, of Jersey, while they have 65 of their own vessels in their waters, they will have granted access to well over 100 EU vessels to be in their waters. They've not been unreasonable in this. He asks about the issue of the crew. I have asked my officials this morning in the conversation I had to check that. We don't think there are any issues with the crew. The vessel was asked to go into port in the usual way as part of a routine inspection, and we don't think there are any issues of that sort to be concerned about. He's also right that UK vessels with a licence to fish in EU waters should be allowed to do so uninterrupted. And it's also the case that the UK will continue to implement and enforce things in good faith in our EEZ as well. We're not going to get into a sort of retaliatory tit for tat on this kind of thing. It's important, I think, that everybody remains calm. What I would say is, in terms of what the French have said that they will do in terms of borders, obviously France as an EU member state is bound by the official control regime, and there will be a role here for the European Commission to ensure that France doesn't break EU law in any approach that it'll take. And that's why obviously our principal port of call for this is talking to the European Commission, who negotiate on behalf of France on these matters. But we will also, of course, speak to our French ministers and French officials as well. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker...
OK, well, that was obviously the House of Commons, George Eustice there, our Environment Secretary, reacting to the latest events in the Channel with regards to essentially the cod war that's going on and whether or not the French essentially are within their rights to have detained one of the boats. It was just quickly to summarise one thing there. George Eustice was saying that basically, as far as they were aware, this particular boat was granted an EU licence, British boat, had been granted an EU licence, was therefore able to fish in those waters. However, for some reason, they think that licence might have been revoked, and basically they're trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, we'll return to details of that as we get them for you. But moving on now, the man who murdered two sisters in a frenzied knife attack in northwest London last June is due to be sentenced at the Old Bailey. Today, Danielle Hussein murdered sisters Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman after making a pact with Satan, he said, that he believed would result in him winning the lottery.
Well, two of its officers are also due to appear before court next week after taking selfies with the girls' corpses. Met Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the girls' families, but that apology has been rejected. Well, for more on this, we can go live now to the Old Bailey, where our Security and Home Affairs editor, Mark White, joins us. Mark, absolutely horrendous situation, this, of course. Just run us through the latest, please.
Yeah, horrific and bizarre crime that took place in June of last year in Friant Country Park in northwest London. The sisters, Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, had been out with friends celebrating Biba's 46th birthday and also celebrating the partial lifting of lockdown. When the friends drifted off home, the two sisters stayed on in Friant Country Park, dancing into the night, enjoying themselves, and then were attacked by this man who was out looking for victims. As you mentioned, this bizarre pact with the devil. He had written a letter to Satan in return for in that letter, had suggested murdering 6 women every 6 months. He would have better luck, not only with women, but better luck with the lottery as well. As bizarre as that is, the judge in this case, Mrs. Justice Whipple, who has been hearing the aggravating and mitigating factors before deciding on a sentence for Daniel Hussein, said that there were no significant mental health issues that have been assessed by psychiatrists, although, to be honest, he has refused throughout this 19-year-old man to engage with psychiatrists. He has indulged in pretty bizarre behaviour throughout, even this morning on his seat, not sitting on it, but sort of half standing on his seat, looking out of the window. He's appearing via a video link from Belmarsh Crown Court. They carried out, as I say, this psychiatric assessment that came up with no real indicators of anything significant. Some issues on the autistic spectrum, but nothing, according to the judge and the psychiatrist, which would have significantly influenced his behaviour to this extent, where he would have committed such a horrific crime. In mitigation terms, the defence said the judge should take into account the fact that he was only 18 at the time of the murders, that actually his bizarre behaviour pointed to his maturity levels or his lack of maturity. And of course, the judge said that she will now consider that. She has gone back into her chambers. It's all moved rather quickly this morning, and in about 15 minutes' time, that sentencing will begin. She will, of course, make sentencing remarks in maybe about 10 or 15 minutes long and then pass that sentence on Daniel Hussein. Unlikely that he will be given a whole life tariff. In other words, that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars because of the fact that he was just 18 at the time of the crime, but he will be looking nonetheless at life in prison with a very significant minimum term that he must spend. As I say, about 50 minutes' time will begin that sentencing procedure.
Mark, thank you very much. Mark White there, our Security and Home Affairs editor outside the Old Bailey, just reacting to, obviously, this absolutely harrowing case that we're awaiting the sentencing for now. Well, just moving away from that, after the break, pubs can finally breathe a sigh of relief after Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced a tax break for alcoholic beverages. We speak with one brewery owner on what that will do for his beers, and this is all going to come after the news from Rosie.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To The Point.
Now, after a difficult year and a half, pubs and breweries across the country have been offered some relief after the Chancellor Rishi Sunak promised to cut business rates and simplify alcohol duty. The simplified alcohol tax means drinks are taxed based on their strength, cutting the taxes on sparkling wine and light beers and dropping the number of main duty rates from 15 to just 6. Hospitality businesses can also expect a 50% business rates discount in England from next year.
Yes, well, let's talk to Colin Wilde now, Managing Director at Castle Rock Brewery, an independent brewery in Nottingham. And I actually was at university in Nottingham. I believe I might have wet my whistle with a couple of your products in the past. But anyway, the tax cuts on alcohol are proportionate to the strength of drink. What does this mean for your double IPA at 8.5%, apparently?
Yes, well, strong beers, we do think do cause more health issues to other people. So we're all in favour of lower strength beers being taxed more favourably.
All right. So overall, do you feel quite positive about what Rishi Sunak has announced for your industry? Is it needed?
Oh, very much so needed. The business rates helps us more than you can imagine. We were looking that we're getting towards a cliff edge at the end of March, and to know that we've got a further year where we've got some easement, that makes it a lot easier for us. Moving on from there, we just would ask that pubs are treated fairly. Pubs for a long number of years have paid much more than their fair share or been a big contributor to the government coffers, and look, does a lot for local employment, does a lot for social benefits and community benefits, and we see the pub as essential, and this is a great way of supporting that into the longer term.
Indeed, and I think one of the things many Brits were sad to see go closed during the pandemic was, of course, pubs. You mentioned there, they have lots of community benefits. And I want to ask you, have you recovered? Do you feel like you've recovered now, your business, from the effects of lockdowns and the pandemic? And if not, when do you think that might be?
We haven't recovered entirely. The whole pandemic leaves a lot of scars for us. It's been a particularly difficult period. The help that we have received has been sufficient for pubs to see it through. Obviously, we're nervous about further restrictions coming into the winter. But the business rates really helps going into next year, because we couldn't plan from March onwards with any certainty whatsoever. We're clearly happy that the beer duty side is being considered fully. We've always felt that it was actually the VAT on alcohol that was the main problem, because supermarkets paid a lot less VAT, driven by the lower sale price.
And what else would you have liked, finally, to see from the Chancellor, or do you feel like what he's given your industry is a good starting point for now?
I think when we look at the detail of the consultation, there might be some finer tweaks that need in there, but it certainly sets a precedent that pubs are treated differently to supermarkets when it comes to the responsible retailing of alcohol and, importantly, the responsible consumption of it too.
Thank you very much for joining us, Colin, and keep up the good work as well. I'll no doubt be investing in some of your stock quite soon, I would imagine. Now, Colin Wild, Managing Director at Castle Rock Brewery, which is an independent brewery in Nottingham, just reacting there to Rishi Sunak's announcements regarding essentially the price of a pint, really.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a tweet, I think, from our very own Neil Oliver yesterday, which said something along the lines of, you know, you'll be homeless and on the streets, but at least your pint will be cheaper, which is, I think, was a tongue-in-cheek way. Is that a phrase?
Yeah, that's one.
Of saying families, given the fact that so many of British families at the moment are very much suffering economically, it just feels a bit strange saying, oh, well, at least your pint will be a bit cheaper. Well,
it's a bit of, it's like, it's tokenism, I think, isn't it?
It is, it's a bit, but hey.
Well, there we go. So, lots of people getting in touch. Let's delve into my inbox now. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Derek's been in touch, and Derek doesn't like me. What a load of rubbish. Patrick Christie, he's got an S on the end, came out with this morning in his bid to hype up and sensationalise the France and British fishing disagreement. To describe it as a Cod War demonstrates how well-informed he is, because most of these vessels are fishing for scallops. Yeah, that's true. I didn't coin the phrase Cod War. That's how it's been referred.
That's how it's been referred to.
Don't want to burst your bubble, Derek, or anything, but yes, anyway, moving away. Thank you for your email there. Derek, of course, speaking up on behalf of Scallops. So, it takes a backbone to deal with the French. This is from Raymond. They're now able to walk all over us. This is in reaction to what's been going on, essentially, which is that the French have detained, impounded, would you say, British boats, and as far as our Environment Secretary was concerned, that boat had a licence to fish in those waters, so we don't quite know exactly what's happening.
Well, he did say it was for he understands it was revoked for some unknown reason. He hasn't quite determined that yet, but we will bring you more on that as it develops, that story. But for now, keep all of your thoughts coming into us on our email, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and after a short break, we'll be back with more on today's top stories. We'll give you the weather.
Hello again. More wet weather, I'm afraid, in some parts of the UK, with the risk of flooding for parts of northern England and southern Scotland. Very mild across the board, with this southwesterly wind bringing subtropical humidity and a lot of moisture. And that moisture is being dumped across the hills of southern Scotland and northwest England as this weather front stalls through the next 24 hours. So more wet weather on the way, on top of what we've already seen through the last 12 to 24 hours. And in some parts of southern Scotland and Cumbria, more than 100 millimetres of rainfall expected by the end of Thursday, leading to a serious risk of flooding in these areas. Elsewhere, drier, but very mild still with this strong southwesterly wind. Some showers into the northwest of Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland as we start off the day on Thursday. Drier to the southeast with some sunny spells coming through, but the rain continues for southern and increasingly eastern Scotland, also for northern England, Wales, and increasingly the southwest through Thursday afternoon, that wet weather pushing in. Another mild day to come, nevertheless, and later Thursday, the focus for the heaviest rain increasingly across Wales and the southwest, particularly over the higher ground where, again, there could be some disruption and some localised flooding by the end of Friday. On Friday, a wet start to the day with areas of rain or showers across much of the west of the UK, but Northern Ireland starts off bright with some sunshine first thing. Also, bright skies for East Anglia and the southeast as we begin Friday. But this area of cloud and rain is finally making some progress east across the country. It breaks up into showers, still some heavy downpours about in places during the morning on Friday before eventually something a bit drier and brighter arrives from the west. But it doesn't last. This weekend stays highly unsettled with further rain or showers, some strong winds at times as well, and turning colder.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christie's. We're here until midday with a show full of all of today's big stories and lots of discussions on the issues you care about. So make sure you get in touch with us at our email gbviews@gbnews.uk as usual, and we'll read those out throughout the show. But first, it's time for the latest news with Rosie.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. This is your news at 11 o'clock. Britain faces its highest tax burden since the 1950s. Well, that's the Resolution Foundation's analysis of the Chancellor's autumn budget. They found that households will pay £3,000 more tax as a result of measures introduced since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, including those announced in yesterday's budget. Well, the Chancellor says his ambition is to lower taxes. He announced an extra £150 billion for public services, tax cuts for businesses, extra cash for hospitals, a softening of the cut to universal credit and a freeze for fuel duty. The Office for Budget Responsibility said the plans will take public spending, though, to the highest share of the economy since the late 1970s. Former Chancellor Ken Clarke told GB News that higher taxes are the result of the economic damage made by Brexit and COVID.
I think we're in for a difficult time with rising costs for everybody, including businesses, inflation, and I don't think all these shortages of key things that we're all suffering from, we're suffering from around the world, they're going to take more than a few months to sort themselves out. So a lot depends on whether the economic recovery is sustained as Rishi is hoping it is.
The French government says it's detained a British trawler and given a verbal warning to another boat fishing in waters off its coast. Tweeting this morning, the French maritime minister said that 2 British ships were fined during the checks of the coast of Le Havre on Wednesday. It's the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. Environment Secretary George Eustace said officials are investigating the circumstances.
I've been able to establish so far is that in respect of that vessel, they were on the list that was provided by the MMO initially to the European Union. The European Union therefore did grant a licence. We are seeing some reports that for some reason they were subsequently withdrawn from the list. It's unclear why that might have been at the moment.
Extinction Rebellion protesters have broken into an oil refinery in Hampshire, demanding that the UK government stops all fossil fuel investments. 2 British Olympians, Laura Baldwin and Etienne Scott, are demonstrating with them. The protesters are using pink boats to blockade the main entrance to the ExxonMobil Fawley refinery. Well, we've spoken to ExxonMobil and they've told us our focus includes reducing our emissions. We respect the right to peaceful protest, but our priority is the safety of our people. ExxonMobil Fawley continues to operate safely and is not experiencing any impact on production. 4 people have been charged after animal rebellion protesters scaled a government building in Westminster yesterday. They were charged for aggravated trespass. All 4 were bailed to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court on November the 15th. Police say 500 rounds of ammunition were found at the film set of Alec Baldwin's movie Rust. It follows the fatal shooting of cinematographer Haylyn Hutchins. Detectives also confirmed that criminal charges were possible. The Santa Fe County Sheriff Adam Mendoza says investigations have revealed vital evidence.
The actual lead projectile that was fired has been recovered from the shoulder of Mr. Souza. The projectile was recovered by medical personnel where he was being treated and turned over to the Sheriff's Office as evidence. We regard this specific spent casing and recovered projectile to be the live round that was fired from the revolver by Mr. Baldwin.
More than 1 million UK households might have been victim to the Amazon parcel brushing scam. Well, it's when people receive mystery packages they didn't order sent by an unknown person. Consumer group Which believes third-party sellers are sending items and then falsely logging them as a genuine purchase to exploit Amazon's search ranking system. Households have reported receiving items like magnetic eyelashes, an iPhone case, a Frisbee and medical gloves. Consumer and civil rights campaigner Jonathan Greatix told GB News that the worrying part is they have your home address.
First thing to do if you ever do get an unsolicited item turn up on your doorstep, number 1, contact Amazon. Say, look, this isn't, I didn't order this. Number 2, change your password. And unfortunately, it can be a bit of a pain, but do change your credit card registered with the account as well.
Sir Paul McCartney is among the stars shortlisted for Book of the Year prize. The lyrics from the Beatles star is among 13 titles vying for the award. You Are a Champion, a children's book written by England footballer Marcus Rashford, is another. Sir Cardozo's first novel since his Nobel Peace Prize titled Clara and the Sun is also competing. You're up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with the latest headlines at 11:30. Now let's return to Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning again. You're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Patrick Christie's. We've got a show full of all of today's big stories and lots of discussions on the issues you care about. So here's what's on the menu in the last hour.
Yes, well, the budget is what's on everyone's minds. How will it affect you and your family? Well, we'll be talking to experts on 2 policy issues that you've told us that you care about, education and the welfare state. We'll bring you the latest on that.
Yes, and Danielle Hussein, the murderer of sisters Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, is set to be sentenced at the Old Bailey very shortly. The then 18-year-old launched a brutal attack on the sisters, fatally stabbing them both. Our Home and Security editor Mark White will bring us the sentencing when it happens.
Yes, we'll also be bringing you the latest on COP26 in Glasgow and what we can expect from what some are calling the climate summit of the century.
Yes, we have all of that coming up and much more across the next hour, and you can get in touch with us as usual on gbviews at gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on sports stars taking the knee.
England opening batsman Jason Roy has said that taking the knee is integral to how we play our cricket. Only if you're playing a sweep shot, surely. Batting, bowling and fielding are integral to how England plays its cricket, not virtue signalling gesture politics. The row about taking the knee escalated after South African wicketkeeper batsman Quinton de Kock was dropped for refusing to take the knee before games. He actually has now come out and said that he will take the knee from now on because basically his international career will be over if he didn't. So, is that where we are now? International cricketers who don't take the knee will have to find another job? I think it's worth asking that question, because what happens if one of our stars decides not to take the knee? Let's say Ben Stokes, a man who is probably the finest cricketer of his generation, who single-handedly won cricket matches for this country in the one-day, T20 and Test arena, decides that he doesn't want to take the knee. Do we drop him? Jimmy Anderson, the Burnley Express, England's all-time leading wicket-taker. If he decides he doesn't want to take the knee, does he never play for us again? Taking the knee has got absolutely nothing to do with how good at cricket you are. And taking the knee is not simply just about racism. It's a visible symbol of the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, it should go without saying that, of course, Black Lives Matter. That's a simple statement of fact, and anyone who disagrees with that is an out-and-out racist and should probably be fed to a pack of very hungry wolves. But the Black Lives Matter organisation has published a manifesto, and in that manifesto, it does call for things like the radical redistribution of wealth. Now, it stands against the notion of a nuclear family as well, for example. So its politics are there for all to see, and they're pretty controversial to say the least. Some people say that taking the knee is a completely separate thing to the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's perfectly fine if you think that. But in my opinion, taking the knee is intertwined with the BLM movement, and so when you take the knee, I think there's an argument to say that you're maybe also endorsing what it stands for, including its politics. I think if we end up in a situation where international sports stars who train their entire lives to become world-class at their craft, give blood, sweat and tears for the badge they wear and the nation they represent, aren't allowed to play because they refuse to endorse a radical political movement, then the world really has gone mad. Fans pay good money to go and watch the best 11 cricketers play the other best 11 cricketers. They don't go and pay money to see people kneel down in a field. Yes, well, it's just in reaction to, obviously, Quinton de Kock, and then Jason Roy came out, didn't he, and said that. I mean, look, I've got no problem if people want to do it. My problem would be if you decide that you don't want to do it and you lose your job.
Yeah, I mean, I think you are conflating a bit taking the knee as an organisation, Black Lives Matter as an organisation and the movement. I completely understand the movement, and actually I think the movement is... It's hard to separate, but I understand why lots of people who support the movement, generally speaking, would be against Black Lives Matter as a political organisation. Look, if somebody wants to take the knee, I've always said I'm not going to stop that person from taking the knee. I'm also not going to boo that person for taking the knee. I wouldn't want to take the knee myself. But going back to Quinton de Kock, because who has obviously now rolled back on his decision because of lots of pressure, of course. What his the Cricket South Africa chairman said about it was that the issue is not about questioning the commitment of any players towards combating racism, but it's about the conduct they display and the messages that sends out to South African public and the broader community during a world event. So that's what the Cricket South Africa chairman has said. But my issue with it actually is that surely you can't force... I don't think it's right to force anybody to take a position against anything, whether it is a social justice movement that everybody agrees with. It's the idea that you have to force people to do what they don't want to do. I think that's completely wrong, and that's almost a separate point from whether this individual player and what his views are. I just don't think you should have a right to force somebody to do what they don't want to do in terms of a political or social statement.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there is the argument, so look, where I'm at is I do think that the BLM movement is intertwined with the politics of the BLM organisation, right? That's where I'm at. People disagree on that issue, but fine, that's my view. And therefore, if you make someone do that and you make someone up like that, you know, it's almost like a political statement right at the start of every single major sporting event. And we don't want
that has been my critique about taking the knee, because it's very hard to separate Black Lives Matter as an organisation and the movement itself, which is why it is so divisive and toxic. But at the same time, there are people who might say, well, I support Black Lives Matter because, yes, as you mentioned there, of course, why would somebody not, unless they were racist,
you would just be an out-and-out racist, yeah.
Didn't matter. So people obviously say, well, of course, I support a movement that is saying Black Lives Matter. And I don't believe all of those people who think that necessarily would support Black Lives Matter as an organisation.
Yes, well, get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and lots of you have been. That's freedom of choice gone then. It's getting worse, that's according to Viv. So Viv's obviously got some strong views on that, and I suppose you could argue that it is. The reason that I really wanted to raise it there was obviously in the news at the moment, but also is I think this is coming down the line, right? Because you know, do we really want to go to, you know, one of our major sporting stars, arguably our best player, and have to say to them, sorry, you can't play because of something that's got nothing to do with sport whatsoever. It's got nothing to do with your ability as a sportsman. We're going to drop you because you don't want to take the knee. And I think that's weird.
But then again, some people would say, well, you can't say that racism has nothing to do with sport and that's taken a stand against, because we've seen what happened with our footballers, for example. And if anything, that's why they felt that they had to express this position against anti-racism and this symbol against anti-racism, because we also saw what happened to our players and continues to happen to our players. So I don't think racism and sport you can separate.
No, it's true. It's true. We, the public, pay good money to watch a sports person entertain us. Their politics or beliefs are not my concern, and that's from Richard. And that's kind of where I'm at as well. You know, if the quality of the output is going to be diminished as well, I mean, look, obviously it doesn't seem like it's happening at the moment, don't get me wrong, but, you know, if a couple of the best players didn't play, but you're still paying full price for a ticket, aren't you, you know?
Yes, indeed. Well, let's move on to the budget. We've been bringing you a bit about that all morning. We even spoke to Michael Portillo, and now the Chancellor's announced that schools are set to receive an extra £4.7 billion in funding over the next 4 years, ending nearly a decade of cuts and returning funding to 2010 levels. This would be an average per pupil cash increase, he says, of more than £1,500. And the budget also pledged £2 billion of new funding to help schools and colleges recover from the pandemic, as well as £200 million to continue the holiday activity and food programme.
Yes, OK, well, joining us now is Francis Gilbert, former teacher and now education expert. Mr Gilbert, thank you very, very much. Well, what do you make of it then? What's your overall takeaway from this? Is this great news for the education sector?
Well, clearly, it's really invaluable that significant sums are spent on catch-up for children who have had their education suffer very significantly during the pandemic. And so there is a substantial sum here, isn't there? There's sort of £2 billion earmarked for catch-up lessons, £1.8 billion for children up to the age of 16, and then another 800 million for 16 to 19-year-olds, which is very significant. That said, if you look at the history of this, the former Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, had actually asked possibly for about £15 billion to be earmarked for catch-up programmes. So that has got opposition and other people commenting that this isn't as much as could have been given, and that obviously within the budget other things have been spent upon. So I would say good news for this extent that, you know, we have got this money earmarked for catch-up, which I think is the vital area to really focus on, so that children have individual tuition in literacy, in numeracy, to catch up with what they've missed. But is it going to be enough to really get those children who suffered so much during the pandemic up to standard? Because there's so many of them, aren't there? You know, and I worry that it isn't quite enough money.
Some people will look on this with quite critical eyes at what we've done, because they'll say, well, actually, we're just sort of trying to maintain a status quo and going back to the levels we were, whether it's before the pandemic or even in terms of 2010, in terms of restoring per pupil funding to 2010 levels. We haven't really, well, the Chancellor hasn't really provided anything to make sure we're actually moving students ahead of where we were before the pandemic. We're just trying to sort of go back to where we were.
Yeah, and I worry that, when the catch-up lessons really worked, actually, it was during the new Labour government. It was very specifically earmarked for literacy and numeracy classes. And what's happened since 2010 is things like the pupil premium have been given to schools to allocate to, for example, disadvantaged children, but we've not really had a specific handle on how that money has been spent. And I do think that the government could be more organised. And it just does seem to be in this government, particularly in the last few years, a sort of chaotic attitude within the DFE, Department for Education, about allocating funding, and sort of shambles over exams, shambles over the curriculum being administered. And you do worry that without some really tight organisation, this money may not get spent in the way that it could be. So we really do need to make sure that it actually is spent on children getting extra lessons, and that money is earmarked and it's not going to, for example, schools are really struggling with buildings and infrastructure, and head teachers may well find that the budgets that they've got mean that they're spending it on things like that. Whereas I think, the government need to actually allocate specific funds for things like buildings and catching up with, IT and those sorts of things. So yeah, I just worry that it could be misspent, some of this money.
All right, well, look, thank you very, very much for joining us. Great to have your views here on the show as we react, obviously, to various different elements of this autumn budget. It's going to affect, obviously, literally pretty much everything. We've covered the price of a pint. We've spoken about, loads of different areas with it, with Michael Portillo as well, and that, of course, is in relation to the education sector. Now, there's been a development in the sentencing of Danielle Hussein, who was convicted of fatally stabbing sisters Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman last summer in a Wembley Park. We can go live to our Home Affairs and Security editor, Mark White, who is at the Old Bailey. Mark.
Well, Danielle Hussein has just been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years. So that's 35 years that he must serve in prison before he is even eligible for consideration for parole. This does not mean, of course, that at 35 years of a sentence that he will be released, but he will at least be potentially eligible for parole. There was no chance of a whole life tariff, in other words, that this young man would spend the rest of his life behind bars because of the fact that he was under 21 at the time of the murders, 18 in fact, just a few days after his 18th birthday, when he went to Friant Country Park in northwest London, where two sisters, Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, had been out with a group of friends celebrating Biba's 46th birthday and also celebrating a partial lifting of lockdown. The group of friends had been partying in the park for most of the afternoon into the evening. When the friends drifted off, the two sisters decided to stay on a bit longer. They were dancing into the evening, filming themselves taking selfies with fairy lights as the darkness descended. Unbeknownst to them, of course, was the fact that Danielle Hussein was out in that park as well, looking for victims. A really bizarre aspect of this case is that he had made a pact with the devil. He'd written a letter to Satan where he had promised to sacrifice 6 women every 6 months in turn for having better luck on the lottery. He'd even gone out after he murdered these two sisters to buy lotteries tickets. So deluded was he about the possibility he thought that he was going to win the lottery. The case did ask questions of his mental health. The judge said that there was a psychiatric report, and although that did assess that there was autistic spectrum disorder, that did not really hold account for the fact that he had committed such a horrific crime. There were no other significant mental health issues diagnosed, although he has refused to cooperate with psychiatrists throughout this process as well. He has continued to be arrogant to the last. He was appearing via a video link from Belmarsh Crown Court, or Belmarsh Prison actually, where he is at the moment, sitting or perching on a chair there. He turned side on to the camera, paying no attention to the judge, Mrs. Justice Whipple, as she read out those sentencing remarks, the aggravating factors of the fact that he has not admitted culpability for this crime, that he claimed it was someone else, despite the letter to the devil in his own handwriting, signed indeed in his own blood. And the fact also, during this frenzied knife attack on the two sisters, he cut himself, and there was blood all over the crime scene. Despite the undeniable burden of evidence against him, he maintained his innocence, that it simply wasn't him to the last, which, according to the judge, just compounded the anxiety and trauma for the family, not only having to cope with the knowledge that their loved ones were murdered in such a horrific way, but having to listen to this young man and observe his bizarre behaviour throughout this trial. Well, I've been looking back at what has been an absolutely horrific and disturbing case.
Thank you very much.
Armed with taser stun guns, the moment police move in to arrest killer Daniel Hussein.
Mate, you're under arrest. Come out. Come out of your dress. Keep walking towards me. Keep walking towards me. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Stay where you are. Hands on your head. Stay where you are. Face me. Hands on your head. Stay where you are. You're under arrest, all right?
He is, it's clear, completely unfazed. A cold, callous young man who just weeks earlier murdered two sisters in a frenzied knife attack. Part, we're told, of a bizarre pact with the devil. This is one of the last images of Hussein's victims, Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, a selfie taken by them minutes before they were murdered. The sisters had been with a group of friends on the 5th of June last year, celebrating Biba's birthday. As the friends drifted off home, Biba and Nicole stayed on in the Friant Country Park, dancing late into the night, until coming face to face with their killer, who stabbed them dozens of times. Their bodies were discovered almost 2 days later by Nicole's boyfriend, as family and friends launched their own search for the missing sisters, frustrated by the slow police response. After the police watchdog this week criticised that initial response as below standard, Scotland Yard Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family. The victim's mother said the time for apologies had long gone. It is yet another deeply uncomfortable moment for the Met boss.
This brings more pressure on the Met and on the Commission's position. The way they dealt with the missing person report and how they investigated it was insufficient. They've apologised for that, but week after week we're seeing more pressure brought on the Met. Different apologies coming out, the Commission's position under threat all the time. They've got an awful lot of work to do to rebuild trust and confidence in police in London.
Can she survive?
I think she'll survive for 2 more years. I think she's determined to see this job through.
Do you have any injuries?
Yeah.
The wrists from the cuffs?
No.
Oh.
In police custody, Hussein still had injuries to his right hand, deep cuts he sustained while stabbing Biba and Nicole.
Is this the interview?
No, that's a question. The injuries on your fingers. What happened there?
Detectives pieced together his movements on the night of the murders. This is him arriving back at his father's house near the park. His blood-stained trousers removed, the injured hand tucked into the jacket tied around his waist. The blood from that injured hand was found all over the crime scene. This is Daniel Hussein in an Asda supermarket in the days before the murders, buying the block of knives he'd go on to use in the attack. And in a search of his mother's home, police uncovered a far more sinister aspect to this crime: satanic symbols in his bedroom. And nearby, a handwritten letter. It was a deal with the devil, a promise to kill 6 women every 6 months. It was signed in his own blood. In return, he believed he'd win the lottery and have better luck with women. Search teams even found receipts for lottery tickets purchased in the days after the murders. It's not known why the sisters were targeted. This is Biba and Nicole in a local co-op buying food and drink shortly before heading to Friant Park. Tragically, they may simply have been in the wrong place at the wrong time when Hussein discovered them. As horrific as these murders undoubtedly were, for the sisters' family and friends, there is the added trauma, not just of the initial lacklustre police response, but in learning that 2 officers who should have been guarding the scene were arrested and then later charged with taking selfies next to the bodies. Those 2 officers are due to appear at the Old Bailey next week. Their lawyers have indicated they intend to plead guilty. But for now, Daniel Hussein is beginning life behind bars for the murder of Biba and Nicole, 2 sisters who'd simply been relishing life and celebrating their freedom from lockdown. Mark White, GB News at the Old Bailey. Well, this has been obviously a very, very difficult and traumatic case for the family of these 2 sisters, not just having to deal with the news of the horrific way in which the 2 sisters were murdered that night back in June of last year, but also absorbing the way in which the Metropolitan Police responded to their initial very anxious calls about the fact that the sisters were missing. That lacklustre response that the Independent Office for Police Conduct said was below standard. Now, as I said in that report, the Met Commissioner, under more pressure, has issued or tried to issue an apology to the family, but the mother of the 2 sisters has rejected that apology. She says the time for apologies has long gone. Now, I should say we are waiting to hear from the mother of the 2 sisters, Mina Smallman. She is a former archdeacon with the Church of England. She will be coming out onto the steps of the court to give her reaction to the sentence today, and no doubt allude to the issues around the Metropolitan Police as well, not just, of course, the issue around their lacklustre initial response, but the very disturbing issue of 2 police officers who should have been guarding the crime scene instead taking selfies next to the sisters' bodies. They are due to appear at court here at the Old Bailey next week, and we understand, according to their lawyers, in a previous court hearing, they intend to plead guilty to that crime. We will also be hearing from the detective inspector in charge of this murder investigation, Maria Green, who will be appearing, we understand, alongside Mina Smallman as they come out to give their reaction to the news that Daniel Hussein, that 19-year-old Satanist who made this bizarre pact with the devil and then went on to murder these 2 beautiful sisters, has been sentenced to life with a recommendation that he serves a minimum of 35 years behind bars before there's even any talk of him being eligible for parole.
Mark, thank you very much for bringing us that report and indeed that package as well. It's just an absolutely devastating set of circumstances, isn't it? And I think you can understand, I think we can all probably understand why the family are not accepting the police's apology. Mark White there, our Home Affairs and Security Editor.
Yes, well, after the break, we'll be back taking a look into the ongoing dispute with France over fishing and speaking with a Jersey fisherman who has been affected. So stay with us for that.
Hello again. Exceptional amounts of rain have fallen across Cumbria during the last 24 hours, and there'll be further heavy rain in places through the rest of today with the risk of flooding. Elsewhere, there will be some dry weather about in the southeast and to the northwest away from this weather front, and it'll be very mild. These southwesterly winds are bringing very mild air, but also bringing a lot of moisture. That moisture now being dumped across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, Wales, and increasingly through the rest of today, parts of the southwest. But the main focus for the time being remains on Cumbria, where an amber warning is still in force because of the risk of an additional 50 to 100 millimetres of rainfall on top of the in excess of 300 millimetres that some western fells have already seen. Risk of flooding here. Also further rain to come for parts of southern and eastern Scotland, and increasingly through the rest of the day, Wales and the southwest will see heavy rain set in, but it's drier towards the east of England, as well as for northern and western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. A few showers here, some brighter spells through the day, clear spells overnight. But through the night, these outbreaks of rain become more showery and they become more extensive across parts of England, Wales, Scotland. A mild night to come, so not a cold start to the day tomorrow, but a wet start in places. Further heavy rain coming through. It does ease for a time across northern England before another spell pushes into southwest Scotland and showers return for much of England as well as Wales during the afternoon. But eventually something a little drier and brighter appears into Northern Ireland, West Wales, as well as Cornwall and Devon. And it's another mild day to come, but it is going to turn colder from the west through Friday and into the weekend. The last of the rain pulling away from northeast Scotland, eastern England on Friday evening. But further showers head in for Friday night across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. And that means that the weekend will remain highly changeable with further rain or showers, strong winds at times as well, and it will turn colder.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christies.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me live from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Your weekend starts here. My show exists to do three things: to inform, to debate and to entertain. Big guests, big stories and big opinions. And I can't do any of it without you. It's lively and it's a little bit funny. So join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Yes, good morning. Now, coming up shortly, we'll be talking to a Jersey fisherman about the ongoing row with France over fishing rights. That's straight after a quick look at all the news with Rosie.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Danielle Hussein has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 35 years for the murder of two sisters in a northwest London park. The 19-year-old fatally stabbed Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman last June after he made what he described as a satanic blood pact with the devil. Earlier this week, an independent report also found the Metropolitan Police's response was below the standard it should have been when the girls were initially reported as missing. Commissioner Cressida Dick offered an apology to the family. Britain faces its highest tax burden since the 1950s. That's the Resolution Foundation's analysis of the Chancellor's autumn budget and the impact of it. Well, they found that households will pay £3,000 more tax as a result of measures introduced since Boris Johnson became a Prime Minister, including yesterday's budget. Well, the Chancellor says, though, it's his ambition to lower taxes. He announced an extra £150 billion for public services, tax cuts for businesses, extra cash for hospitals, a softening of the cut to universal credit and a freeze for fuel duty. The Office for Budget Responsibility says the plans will take public spending to the highest share of the economy since the late 1970s. The French government says it's detained a British trawler and given a verbal warning to another boat fishing in waters off its coast. Well, tweeting this morning, the French Maritime Minister said that two British ships were fined during checks off the coast of Le Havre on Wednesday. The Environment Secretary, George Eustace, said he's urgently investigating the situation. It is the latest escalation in the dispute between Britain and France over fishing rights. Extinction Rebellion protesters have broken into an oil refinery in Hampshire, demanding that the UK government stops all fossil fuel investments. Two British Olympians, Laura Baldwin and Etienne Scott, are demonstrating with them. The protesters are using those pink boats to blockade the main entrance to the ExxonMobil Fawley refinery. When we've spoken to ExxonMobil, they told us our focus includes reducing our emissions. We respect the right to peaceful protest, but our priority is the safety of our people. ExxonMobil Fawley continues to operate safely and is not experiencing any impact on production. You're up to date here on GB News. I'll be back with more on today's stories at 12 o'clock. But now, back to Mercy and Patrick.
Well, now it's time for our controversy today, where we talk about the hottest topic of the day. We'll be talking about the fishing dispute between France and Britain. I did a monologue on it earlier, which has annoyed all the right people on Twitter, I can see. But anyway, already today, two British trawlers, apparently, have been detained by French authorities because they reportedly do not have the right to fish in French waters.
Yes, and Environment Secretary George Eustace has been taking questions about this incident this morning in Parliament, and he says he's still trying to get to the bottom of why their licences have been revoked. France has already threatened to impose sanctions from next week in the dispute, including disrupting trade networks between the two countries.
Indeed. Well, Captain Jack Bailey is a fisherman on the boat White Waters in Jersey and is with us now. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Well, what's your take on this then? Do you think, why was the licence revoked? Do you have any idea how this could have happened?
I mean, they've had enough time now to get all their paperwork in. So they've had their extension periods. They've also they should have been filling out data 20 years ago to cover this, and they haven't managed to put that through. I can see where the trouble is. It is coming harder and harder to understand now with the paperwork side of it, is the government having to double check all these bits of paperwork, and I can see that's where a lot of the frustration is.
Yeah. So you think it's a lot of the bureaucracy. I mean, what do you think as a fisherman? Obviously, a lot of this comes from the fact we voted to leave the European Union, and this, some would say, is a direct result of that Brexit vote. I mean, how do you feel Brexit has panned out for you as a fisherman?
Well, being a fisherman from Jersey, we didn't get a vote on Brexit as such. It's kind of back. Well, we had an agreement called the Granville Bay. It hadn't worked for the last 10, 15 years, and we used Brexit as I think it would be the perfect time to get out of it.
Of the way, what do you make of the way that that the French have behaved in this particular incident? Do you think we're just as bad as them in that respect?
No, not at all. They're using bully boy tactics now. I mean, we live on an island over here, and they're threatening to cut our power off if they don't get their licences. So why would we give them more licences just to keep them happy? I honestly, I don't think we should.
So you, as a fisherman, what do you want Boris Johnson to do? Do you want him to just stand firm? Do you want him to not give in to any of the French demands, even if that does mean, you know, potential consequences? The French are talking about disrupting trade and generally kicking off.
I mean, yeah, he should stand firm and support the industry that feeds the nation, you know, and that's what he should do.
I agree. What's the situation just like actually at the moment? Are there more French boats fishing in our waters? Are there a lot of illegal French boats fishing in our waters, or what's the actual situation like?
I mean, yeah, there is a lot more boats. There's going to be a lot more activity in waters that they've only got a short amount of time to fish if they haven't got a licence, or if they haven't got a track record of fishing them waters. They're going to try and build a track record, so they will be trying to make one for themselves. But obviously, with the time period that was given, in the 3 years prior, if they had days at sea in that time period, then they would get a license over here. But they haven't. A lot of boats haven't qualified for that.
Bailey, thanks for joining us this morning. Fisherman there on the boat White Waters in Jersey. It's a tricky one. He alluded to the bureaucracy that's taking place. The British government apparently says it's granted 98% of licence applications for the EU vessels to fish in its waters. France says half of its fishermen, half of the licences haven't been issued, basically, and they don't believe they're living up to the Brexit agreement, which is where all this is coming from. And now, of course, they've taken this action.
I think we're just going to go live now, actually, to the Old Bailey. A news conference is being held right outside the Old Bailey after the sentencing of Daniel Hussein. I think we're going to go there right now.
Yep. Okay. Ready? Okay, Daniel Hussein is a dangerous, arrogant and violent individual who from the outset has shown no remorse or acceptance for his actions. The sentence handed down by the court today is a reflection of the seriousness of his crimes. I hope that knowing he will now spend many years behind bars, this will bring a small degree of comfort to Bieber and Nicole's loved ones. This has been a shocking and chilling case, and I know the investigation will stay with all of us involved for a very long time. Daniel Hussein went out that night with the intention of killing in order to satisfy his bizarre fantasies under the deluded belief he would be rewarded with financial prosperity. His wicked acts have cut short the lives of two completely innocent women who were simply celebrating a birthday, Bieber's birthday. The senselessness of Hussein's actions has made it all the more difficult for Bieber and Nicole's loved ones to come to terms with their loss. Despite this, throughout our investigation, subsequent trial, they've shown the utmost dignity and strength in the most unimaginable of circumstances. My thoughts and those of my colleagues are always with them. Thank you.
I think you've heard me say in the past there'll be no celebrations here, but justice has been done. But I think we do need to review that kind of separation. When is someone an adult? And I think it's very disrespectful to say that children can't tell the difference between good and evil. So that's something else I will be campaigning about. But today we're celebrating what is wonderful about the Metropolitan Police. I've never been one to cast a whole organisation by one particular sort of incident. But we do have a problem. We do have an underground that has infiltrated and growing in our Met Police. But once again, I want to say thank you to this team that worked tirelessly to find the killer. The hours that they put in, and you know when someone's just doing a job and when they're invested. Well, so many people have become invested in this story. And I want to thank the media. You're finally getting our story. You're understanding why everybody's important. And you're not falling into the trap of highlighting one story against another. Everybody is worth knowing about. And sadly, I've had lots of requests for interviews, but the last few weeks have been extremely difficult for me. They have triggered my ailments, which is CFS and fibromyalgia, and what happens is your brain doesn't work how it should do. And so I only want to speak when I feel I can do it justice. But thank you all for being here and caring, and get the message out to your bosses. When you interview someone for an hour and they only put it on for 2 minutes, they're saying something very bad about the importance and the significance of those people. And whether they're on the front page, the middle page or the back page, you put a precedent on who is more important. Everyone's important. Don't make that mistake, because when I feel better, I'm coming for you. Thank you. You know, they were beautiful, beautiful girls to look at anyway, but they were real people with hearts. Bieber has left behind a daughter who has given birth to a son in the last year, becoming up for a year, and I'm a great-grandmother. And I only met him because of COVID. I only met him for the first time at the celebration of life. So life is going on. There is a legacy. And Nicole, I think we grieve more for her because there was 20 years difference. She had 20 years less than Bieber. But to know her was to love her. And there's so much more I'm going to share with you. And you can see her in action. And lots of families have given tribute to Bieber because she was an amazing social worker who was able to drill down and do the difference between, there could never be cover-ups. She wanted to see the kids, she wanted to know if there was food there, she wanted to know whether they were really on it. But she would never take her child away unless she tried everything. So, good girls, I'm really, really proud of them.
Mina, can you just share with us your thoughts about Danny's safe behaviour?
Do you know what? It's all a performance. You know, I taught secondary kids for 20 years. 15 of those were all boys. There's nothing you can't tell me about men and boys. And that is a performance designed to, I don't know, elicit sympathy or to have us believe that there's something really wrong with him. There's nothing wrong with him. He's just an obnoxious human being. And at one point, there was a screen in front of us, and it was a tiny bit. We could only see a tiny... And the clerk said, would you like us to... We can make that bigger picture. I said, no, thank you. We don't actually need to see him. He's a broken human being who, if he hadn't been caught, 4 other families may have been suffering what we have. Well, he ain't out there now, and I think he is so deluded, come 35 years' time, they won't give him, they won't let him out. They won't let him out. I won't let them out. Thank you.
No, that's it. We're going to stop now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mina Smallman there, the mother of Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman, very, very difficult to listen to in parts. She, of course, absolutely loved those daughters, beautiful daughters, she said, and spoke of their life and vitality. They were up in Friant Park celebrating the birthday of Biba Henry at the time that they were murdered by Daniel Hussein, and you know, they had a zest for life. They had been under lockdown. They were celebrating part of the fact that the lockdown had been partially lifted, and they were going to enjoy themselves as much as they can. They danced well into the evening, and it was during that time when their friends had drifted off and the two sisters were still there that this 18-year-old man, as he was at the time, struck. He was out looking for victims. This bizarre deal that he had made with the devil to sacrifice 6 women. In fact, Simon Harding, former Detective Chief Inspector, was in the background of that shot there as Mina Smallman was talking to the camera. He told me that he is convinced that Daniel Hussein would have gone on to murder many more women had he not been stopped by police. And you heard from Mina Smallman there in terms of her reaction to the police. She did not want today to go into all of the controversies over the initial police response to her being reported missing, or indeed the issues around those 2 officers who are going to be appearing in court next week charged with taking selfies next to the crime scene. Instead, she wanted to talk about what was great about the Metropolitan Police, and that is the murder investigation team, who she has, throughout this process, had nothing but praise for. She said they have always been there, have prosecuted this investigation with every ounce of their enthusiasm to try to ensure that this individual was put before the courts, which has resulted today, of course, in that sentence passed, life with a minimum tariff of 35 years. So he will have to serve at least 35 years in prison before he is eligible to apply for parole. No guarantee, of course, that he would be given it there. And Mina Smallman saying there's no way that she thinks he would ever be released even after 35 years. And clearly, if she's spared, she says she will be ensuring that he will not be released at that time.
Well, Mark White, thank you so much for bringing us that, and such strength there from the mother of Biba Henry and Nicole Smallman. You can just tell how strong of a woman she is, even in the face of what's happened to her daughter as well. That's it from us here today at To The Point, but don't go away, because up next we're bringing you the briefing with Gloria De Piero, so stay with us for that as well.
Hello again. Exceptional amounts of rain have fallen across Cumbria during the last 24 hours, and there'll be further heavy rain in places through the rest of today, with the risk of flooding. Elsewhere, there will be some dry weather about in the southeast and to the northwest away from this weather front, and it'll be very mild. These southwesterly winds are bringing very mild air, but also bringing a lot of moisture. That moisture now being dumped across parts of southern Scotland, northern England, Wales, and increasingly through the rest of today, parts of the southwest. But the main focus for the time being remains on Cumbria, where an amber warning is still in force because of the risk of an additional 50 to 100 millimetres of rainfall on top of the in excess of 300 millimetres that some western fells have already seen. Risk of flooding here. Also further rain to come for parts of southern and eastern Scotland, and increasingly through the rest of the day, Wales and the southwest will see heavy rain set in, but it's drier towards the east of England, as well as for northern and western parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. A few showers here, some brighter spells through the day, clear spells overnight. But through the night, these outbreaks of rain become more showery and they become more extensive across parts of England, Wales, Scotland. A mild night to come, so not a cold start to the day tomorrow, but a wet start in places. Further heavy rain coming through. It does ease for a time across northern England before another spell pushes into southwest Scotland, and showers return for much of England as well as Wales during the afternoon. But eventually something a little drier and brighter appears into Northern Ireland, West Wales, as well as Cornwall and Devon. And it's another mild day to come, but it is going to turn colder from the west through Friday, and into the weekend. The last of the rain pulling away from northeast Scotland, eastern England on Friday evening, but further showers head in for Friday night across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest, and that means that the weekend will remain highly changeable with further rain or showers, strong winds at times as well, and it will turn colder.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.